And you're very welcome to this meeting of the Oireachtas Committee on Fisheries and Maritime Affairs. And before we begin, I want to bring to your attention a note on privilege and witnesses, and we have many witnesses here today. Those of you giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts, and I believe all our witnesses are actually on site here today, you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you give to this committee. And that means that, as a witness, you have full defence in any defamation action for anything said at this committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at my direction as Chair. And witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Privilege against defamation does not apply to the publication by you, outside of the proceedings held by the committee, of any matter arising from these proceedings. And to our members, I just remind you of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex in order to participate in public meetings. I will not permit a member to participate where they are not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, a member who attempts to participate from outside the precincts will be asked to leave the meeting. And if you are joining us via Microsoft Teams during the meeting, that prior to making your contribution, you confirm to me verbally that you are in fact on the grounds of Leinster House. And you're also reminded, members, of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable, or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. And if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you'll be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with that direction. And as you all know, the agenda for today's meeting is the marine protected areas. This is the second such meeting we've had on this topic, and we're going to hear from several witnesses representing the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment. We have Dr. Rory O'Leary, Principal Officer. We have Dr. Oliver O'Kyle, Senior Advisor, Mr. Conal O'Connor, Assistant Principal Officer, and Ms. Joanne Kenny, Executive Officer. We have representatives of the Seafood Ireland Alliance. We have Mr. John Lynch, Chief Executive of the Irish South and East Fish Producers Organisation. We have Mr. Patrick Murphy, Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation. Representing Fair Seas, we have Mr. Donald Griffin, Campaign Coordinator, Ms. Grace Carr, Marine Policy and Advocacy Officer of the Irish Wildlife Trust, Ms. Emma Armshaw, Marine and Coastal Policy Officer, Sustainable Water Network. And joining us also from Fair Seas, we have Ms. Isolt Cambe in the Visitors Gallery, and you're very welcome. And finally, representing Coalition 2030, Ms. Karen Cieselski, Coordinator of the Environmental Pillar, and Ms. Una Duggan, Head of Policy and Advocacy with Birdwatch Ireland. And Ms. Rochelle Strecker from Coalition 2030 also joins us in the public gallery. You see we have quite a number of members here today, and we've a lot of witnesses, more than we've had at a meeting, I think, to date for this committee. So the opening statements of the various witness groups have been circulated to members in advance. So I'd ask that each group of witnesses gives a 2-minute summary of your opening statement. There are clocks around the room, so you'll see them. There's red digital clocks, countdown timers. So I just ask you to keep an eye on that. And then when we go to the questions and answers immediately after that, I'll ask members to indicate. I'll call them in one by one. There'll be 10 minutes allocated to each member in which they get to put their questions and receive answers. So within that, I say that to remind the members who might have forgotten over the Christmas break, it's 10 minutes, and that has to include both your question and time for your witnesses to answer. And just to make things move more fluidly, I'd ask members, when they're directing a question, that they would say to whom they're directing it, either the individual or the witness group, just again to aid us in progressing this meeting. So I will go in order that I read out and ask the department and the department officials to give a 2-minute summary, and then I'll go to the other witness groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I thank the committee for the invitation to participate at today's meeting. My name is Rory O'Leary, so I'm Principal Officer for Marine Strategic Policy in the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Oliver O'Kyle, Senior Advisor in the Department's Marine Environment and Planning Section, Mr. Conal O'Connor, Assistant Principal Officer, and Ms. Joanne Kenny, Executive Officer, both from the Marine Strategic Policy Section. Just to summarise the opening statement, I'd like to emphasise some key points. Marine protected areas are key area-based measures that can contribute significantly to ensuring that we have a healthy, biologically diverse, productive and a sustainably used marine environment. They are important tools to help Ireland to achieve EU and international obligations and to designating a minimum of 30% of our maritime area by 2030. The area of Ireland's seas and oceans that are currently under area-based protection amounts to approximately 10%, so we acknowledge we have a distance to go. The work to deliver a legislative basis for the designation and management of MPAs through a standalone Marine Protected Areas Bill had been underway since 2022 and 2023. Following the transfer of responsibility for marine environment functions, including marine protected areas, to the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment, a review of options for delivering the legislative basis for MPAs was carried out. And this review looked at two main options. Firstly, to continue with the MPA bill, and secondly, incorporating the MPA designation process into the existing Designated Maritime Area Plan, or DMAP, process under the Maritime Area Planning Act 2021, also known as the MAP Act. This work concluded that the latter option as the preferred option for the following reasons, and I'll state these briefly. A standalone bill would establish a third system of making spatial designations in Irish waters, thereby adding another layer of complexity to marine governance. An analysis of DMAP provisions against the strategic objectives of the draft MPA bill concluded that MPAs could be delivered more coherently and quickly by way of an amendment to the MAP Act rather than through that bill. In particular, the DMAP process, like the draft Marine Protected Areas Bill 2024, makes provision for extensive public participation, significant stakeholder engagement, appropriate oversight, as well as very clear policy certainty and governance for the designated area. This represents a more integrated and aligned approach through the use of existing procedures. MPAs can fit well into DMAP structures, and their inclusion in the MAP Act further embeds environmental matters in planning legislation, emphasising the interconnection of planning and the environment in which human activity occurs. This integrates the ecosystem-based approach to management, which underpins the implementation of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, maritime spatial and planning across the EU.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And like I said, the opening statements have been circulated. So we'll move to Seafood Ireland Alliance, and if either Mr. Lynch or Mr. Murphy could give a short summary. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I'll let my colleague Mr. Lynch take the. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciarán. I'll just give a short synopsis of the opening statement we submitted. The Seafood Ireland Alliance recognises the need for conservation and restoration of sensitive marine habitats and ecosystems. This is important not only for addressing the biodiversity crisis, but also for supporting sustainable fisheries, which are critical for food security, as outlined in the EU Action Plan. Protecting and restoring marine ecosystems for sustainable and resilient fisheries, sustainably managed and caught fish is a source of high quality and affordable protein with a relatively low carbon footprint. It is essential to food security for many people and to maintain an economic basis for fishing communities. Ensuring sustainable fishing and sustainably managed fish stocks is also key to protecting ocean biodiversity and fighting against climate change. The development of marine protected areas offers one approach towards protecting marine habitats and sensitive species. However, to be effective and successful, their development, design and designation need to be informed by robust, transparent science and supported by the participation and engagement of all relevant stakeholders. And the Seafood Ireland Alliance recommend that we adopt principles for co-creation, co-design and co-management with the fishing industry playing a central role in this process. In designing MPAs, and the SAA highlight the need to follow these basic principles, which are the following. Selection should be based principally on scientific evidence and involve meaningful stakeholder engagement processes. The key objective should be to safeguard natural features based on principle of sustainable use. Management should be on a site-by-site basis rather than on simplistic general principles. There should be a presumption of use within MPA of conservation objectives can be met, accepting that some activities may need to be restricted. Possible management measures should be explored with stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lynch. And I'd ask for Fair Seas now to give a 2-minute summary of their opening statement.
Cathaoirleach and members of the committee. I represent the Fair Seas Coalition, comprising 7 leading environmental NGOs and networks in Ireland, and our goal is to ensure that at least 30% of Ireland's ocean is protected by 2030 through an ecologically coherent and well-managed MPA network. This is in line with Ireland's international and national commitments. Our ocean territory is more than 7 times the size of our landmass and supports livelihoods, food security, climate regulation and a unique natural heritage, yet less than 10% of Ireland's marine area is currently designated as an MPA through our SAC and SPA network. However, the scientific evidence is clear. Ireland's marine ecosystems face increasing pressures from things such as climate change, overfishing, habitat loss and pollution. Our latest Marine Strategy Framework Directive report shows that the descriptor of biological biodiversity has failed to achieve good environmental status, and this also mirrors broader trends. In 2023, the OSPAR report stated that biological diversity is continuing to decline across much of the region. So MPAs are an essential conservation tool used by countries across the globe. Well, when designed and effectively managed and incorporate robust stakeholder engagement and participation, MPAs can deliver a wide range of benefits through including driving biodiversity recovery, increasing fish and other marine species abundances, enhancing climate resilience and supporting positive social, economic, community and public health outcomes. As set out in Ireland's programme for government, then reiterated on numerous occasions by various ministers and by An Taoiseach, Ireland is committed to bringing forward new national legislation to enable the designation and management of nationally derived MPAs, which will allow us to meet our 30 by 30 commitment. Yet despite the repeated expressions of intent by the government, progress on the legislation has stalled, and now January 2026 the legislation is publicly facing demonstrably no further advanced than it was 3 years ago. The continued delay of this critically important legislation cannot continue. MPA legislation and the effective protection of Ireland's marine environment are not optional or aspirational measures. They are essential to the proper functioning of marine ecosystems and delivery of ecosystem services, as well as being the foundation of a resilient blue economy and key to the many societal and economic benefits that healthy seas provide. Fair Seas have done some work on this, and we have developed a 10 key asks, which I won't go through now, but I sent through to the committee along with this written statement. But they're based around strong and ambitious legislation with targets, robust management framework and principled stakeholder engagement. And we also, to achieve that ecologically coherent network of successful MPAs, we also need to manage our current SACs and SPAs better. Unfortunately, successful governments have failed over many years to adequately resource, implement and enforce effective management in these sites, which just underscores the need to get new national legislation for MPAs right. Fair Seas is ready to work constructively with the committee, government and all stakeholders to ensure this happens and that our MPA network is effective, fair and fit for the future.
Thank you very much for that. And I now ask a representative from Coalition 2030 to give 2 minutes proceeds. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair. Coalition 2030 is an alliance of more than 70 civil society organisations and trade unions working together to hold Ireland accountable for its commitment to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The SDGs present an interconnected social and environmental policy roadmap, setting out guiding principles which, if enacted, would ensure that we stay on course towards a sustainable future. Goal 14 calls for the conservation and sustainable use of our oceans. We urge the government to prioritise SDG 14 within national policies and to commit to protecting our marine environment for current and future generations, specifically through robust marine protected areas legislation.
Cathaoirleach and committee members. Birdwatch Ireland is a charity whose mission is the conservation of wild birds and other biodiversity in Ireland. We have 15,000 members and local branches nationwide that host around 400 events annually for the public. We're also a founding partner of the Fair Seas Coalition. We have been involved in marine matters for many decades and have successfully restored populations of seabird species in Ireland over that time period. Ireland is one of the most important countries in the EU for seabirds, not only because of the sheer numbers of breeding pairs and their diversity, but also because our territorial waters are globally important for species that pass through them or feed during the winter. People who enjoy nature flock to see seabirds, especially the puffin in places like Great Saltee in Wexford, Skellig Michael in Kerry, sites in Cork, Clare and Donegal, and in Dublin, including Ireland's Eye. Accessible breeding seabird colonies are an important form of ecotourism and generate income for local people, often in remote areas at the coast, from where visitors take ferries, have lunch or stay over on their visit. Done properly and with wardening to prevent disturbance to the birds at the vulnerable breeding time, seabird watching is an important income-generating endeavour that supports local communities. In Ireland, 23 of Ireland's 24 breeding seabirds are red or amber listed birds of conservation concern. The kittiwake and the puffin are also globally vulnerable. There's a range of pressures and threats to them, including overfishing, disturbance at breeding colonies, climate change, avian flu, and more. Seabirds are also the species group that are most threatened by offshore renewables. We need offshore renewables, but they must be very carefully planned. Bird wind sensitivity mapping is of huge assistance in this regard, and national plans for offshore wind should be informed by this sensitivity mapping. One area where we had a gap in our knowledge was that we didn't know exactly what parts of Irish territorial waters were important for seabirds. So in 2023, we started a project to identify those important areas. We collated and analysed all available survey and tracking data, and in 2025, we published a map and a report on 49 colony important bird areas and 24 areas in the marine.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duggan.
Please, can I just one sentence?
One sentence more, yeah.
And so we are calling for these marine protected areas, for these IBAs to be designated now as SPAs, and if they are, they would bring Ireland's, it would be 7%, an additional 7% to reaching the 30 by 2030 target.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses for those summaries, and we'll open to questions and answers. Deputy Whitmore has indicated first. So it's 10 minutes on the clock, Deputy.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming in and for your presentations. And I think it's going to be a quick fire round because there's a lot of you. I think my question's primarily to the department. When you talk about 10% of our marine as protected, what is the tangible, like what does that actually mean? And are those boundaries outlined on maritime maps? And just very short.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. Yeah, that 10% refers to designations under the Natura directives, so the birds and habitats, which also form part of the contribution towards the 30%.
And how does that protect anything within the marine?
Because there are existing marine designations, such as SACs and SPAs, that are protected under the Natura directives.
What activities are impacted by those designations? What activities?
What activities? Whatever.
Like if we say that we already have 10%, what does that mean? Because our biodiversity is continually dropping, right? So what does that mean from
my
a
colleague,
protection perspective?
Yeah, so firstly, it's important to say that the competent authority for the current designated sites is the National Parks and Wildlife Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. The 10% we're referring to contains the existed sites for which there are statutory instruments in place already, but also proposed sites and candidate sites. So it's not just those that have statutory instruments, so it's wider than that. In terms of what level of protection, once the site has its conservation objectives published, then any activity that is proposed that may impact on the conservation objectives of the site has to be assessed and screened for appropriate assessment. So essentially any development, or including fishing, for example, are subject to assessment to ensure that the conservation objectives of the sites are met.
Okay, and has that happened? This isn't your area.
Well, I have a bit of experience in this space, but as I said, we're not the competent authority in that space, so it's probably better addressed to the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Okay. But my understanding is that, for example, fisheries assessments, the risk to these sites from fisheries have been done. I'm not sure how recently. And I think also appropriate assessments are, as a rule, done for development applications. So that's the best I can give you.
Okay, thank you. And are they mapped on maritime maps? So if a fisher was out there, do they know when they've crossed into an area?
Again,
for which
we're not the competent authority for it, but in my experience, when a proposal for a site, for example, is taken forward, the minister responsible actually publishes the map as part of the whole process. So those maps would be on public record, whether they're and they would be published in the newspapers as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Along the way, so there would be a map for each of these locations that we're
But
talking
not on the
about.
maps that boats would use when they're. And I'll address that to national parks at some other stage. In relation to, so essentially we're moving, or the Minister's decided to move from a standalone bill to DMAP process, which I do have concerns about, but I do understand the rationale for speedy. I think if there's already a bill that's 3 years in the making, I'm not sure it's going to be quicker to come up with a new process, but can you tell me what I find interesting actually, so thank you for this document, and I did attend the Birdwatch Ireland briefing on the IBAs previously, and I had a look at the DMAP because what we need to know is that DMAP process is really robust, because if you're going to build on it and use it as the model for the MPAs, we need to know that that's really robust. And I'm surprised, I suppose, at the difference between the DMAPs that you produce, the locations, and actually what was produced using the sensitivity mapping from Birdwatch Ireland. And can you explain the difference in those geographical areas? I would imagine that the closer you go to shore, the more sensitivity it is for birds, but I think is it DMAP A looks quite close to shore. So I'm just wondering what bird data was used in the development of that particular DMAP.
Thanks, Deputy. I suppose there's a couple of pieces in that question. Specifically, I think the latter part relates to the process around the South Coast DMAP, and which I can speak to, but I suppose maybe to come back to the intent around the new legislative approach was exactly to build on the existing DMAP process that's established already by legislation in the Maritime Area Planning Act, and to use that and adapt that to deliver marine protection through the designated Maritime Area Plan process. Just to be clear that it is, although it's an amendment proposed to the existing legislation, it is a substantial amendment. It's not a kind of tweaks around the edges. There's quite a bit of detailed piece in that. So just I think it's important to reassure members as well that there won't be any dilution or diminution of the importance applied to the marine protected area process as a result of that amending legislation. It is just simply to use the vehicle that is already there and to maximise, I suppose, the architecture that's already in place for marine governance rather than introducing a third layer of complexity to it. So while we're drafting that legislation, we are absolutely committed to making sure that it is participatory and inclusive, as the DMAP process already is. In terms of the South Coast DMAP, that is the only DMAP that lives and breathes at the moment, although another one is in gestation. That South Coast DMAP was for a specific purpose for offshore renewable energy. It's important to state that a DMAP proposal for an MPA will be specific to deliver an MPA. It will be a DMAP proposal to deliver a marine protected area in accordance with that particular proposal. So it will be a separate process to deliver MPAs just using the designated Maritime Area Plan architecture for it. So it's not a case that there'll be an overlap or there'll be combined processes to deliver ORE and MPAs in one. There'll be separate proposals, separate stakeholder engagement, separate processes to deliver that. So I think that's important to say that there'll be quite.
I suppose I'm looking at the clock ticking down, yeah. So apologies, but I suppose and I understand that we've heard from the fishers that they're worried about the process for DMAPs. That was, and that they didn't really represent a co-design system. And then when I look at this map, it just seems to me that, like, this entirety of the area has been deemed as sensitive through the scientific modelling and evidence that's been collected, and yet there's 4 DMAPs or 4 areas. So I'm just wondering how can both of those be true? How can we have 4 areas that, you state are okay for wind farms, and then we also have scientific evidence saying that actually they're very sensitive for bird populations, bird foraging, whatever, Yeah,
so I think I suppose we're speaking about the questions about the specific process undertaken during the South Coast DMAP, which I think is a question you're asking. So that was undertaken in accordance with a very detailed consultation, stakeholder engagement, and appropriate assessment and strategic environmental assessment, and environmental assessments as part of that. The best available data was used, and it went through that process. So I suppose the integrity of that South Coast DMAP was built on the participatory nature of the process. There was a proposal set out that was published. There was an accompanying public participation statement which included how stakeholder engagement would be taken into account, and the data piece around that. And all of that was worked through, I suppose, in a statutory way, including appropriate assessment and strategic environmental assessment.
I do want to thank you for that answer. I do want to bring Birdwatch in. I suppose I am just trying to figure out how two maps that should be showing sensitive, or areas are showing different things. So did you use the same data that Birdwatch used? I don't know, was there a sharing of data, or do you want to, yeah?
So in relation to the strategic planning for offshore wind, I mean, it is a really good idea that this DMAP process and a national DMAP process is undertaken. We fully support this. And as I said, we support the deployment of offshore renewables because seabirds as well are threatened. But just to your question on the South Coast DMAP, we would have concerns about how seabird data was taken into account or wasn't taken into account during as part of the assessments underpinning the South Coast DMAP and the Natura impact statements for that. And basically there is I'm not sure how it all worked out, but it does appear that there was different data sets used, and our concern would be, was all available data used or trawled through or found or collated? So we have significant concerns in relation to that, because it would appear that Town Nua Area A has no seabird data underpinning it, and that is a big concern for us. But that's a planning process that will happen going forward, and we would just really hope that whatever that the national DMAP will make sure that seabirds are taken into account in the proper way, with all the available data used and including sensitivity mapping, to make sure we have the best possible outcome for seabirds. That's the only goal of Birdwatch Ireland, is to support the really good deployment of offshore renewables in the right places to do the best for the birds.
But you don't believe that bird data was used for what?
There was data used. There was data used,
okay.
But there was for Area A, there is no sign. We can't see any from the reports that we were presented with, that we went through. We could not see any seabird data underpinning that.
Okay. So
sorry, Deputy. I'll go to Deputy.
Can I? Thank you. And will we get another round?
There'll be another opportunity.
Before we move on, can I just raise that issue, because just in relation to the representation of the different groups, because it is important, but it's not.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
So this is just a question for Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, I understand that you represent the Irish South and West Fisheries organisation. I'm just wondering, because I'm just trying to get some clarity on this. When you're on Facebook and your Facebook profile, is that a personal Facebook page, or is that a representative? Are you representing the organisation in that? So, for example, the reason I'm asking, because this might seem a bit strange and out of context, the reason I'm asking is before Christmas you came onto my Facebook page and you said that I was anti-democratic and our process for selecting a presidential candidate was anti-democratic. I then went on and had a look at your page, and you claim my party is anti-Irish. And I think pro-refugee was what you said. And then I had a look at the organisational page where you said, you claimed that I was lying. No, I think this is really important now, because we have someone in who's representing a number of fishers in a particular area, and I'm just trying to get some understanding.
Okay, the question has been put, and I'll give 30 seconds to respond, and then I suggest that it's no longer the business of this committee.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I valid your question. And if you want to take this off air, Deputy, I've asked you.
I'm happy because you did it. It was in a public forum when you raised this with me, so I'm happy to deal with it. And I do also
Deputy,
think it's
I'm
really
giving
important
a lot of leeway
that the
Deputy,
people that you represent are
Deputy,
aware that
I'm
you're
going to ask you
dealing
to
with a
stop now.
committee member in this manner.
Deputy,
and I really
you're
don't
out of
think you're
order.
doing them any favours,
Deputy
Mr.
Whitmore,
Murphy. I really don't.
Do we switch off the mic? We're just going to move on. Deputy, I gave you leeway. I gave you latitude,
fine, thank you.
and you took advantage of it. So please don't do that again. Deputy
Chair,
McLaughlin.
I do want my 30
we're
seconds.
moving on. I apologise. We're
I've
moving
been
on.
attacked personally here, and
moving
my
on.
professional job
asked
now
you
has
to
been called into
clarify.
question by a
Deputy Whitmore,
deputy.
you can bring it up
clarify.
after the meeting.
Absolutely, and I
by
just
all
want to
means,
make
you can
that
bring it up
point.
there.
Sorry,
It's
Deputy,
available.
I want to make this point. I have
Deputy
reached
Murphy,
out to that
you're out
deputy
of
to
order
talk
as well.
about these issues. She has refused to meet us or our organisation
You know what?
to bring it
This
up.
committee has
Facebook
board
is the only place to
Could
bring
you
it
turn
up.
off,
No,
Mr. Murphy's microphone
unfortunately,
as well,
I would say there's
Mr.
a
Murphy,
point of order here.
Look, I've told you you're both out of order. We're leaving it out. We're moving on. Deputy McLaughlin.
Yeah, thanks, Cahill. So, as you know, a previous Oireachtas committee dealt with the previous legislation. That was the Joint Committee on Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And one of their recommendations, there was a range of recommendations that they made in terms of the heads of bill that time, and obviously I assume the department have factored a lot of that into their consideration. But there's one, recommendation 25, that states the committee recommends that the MPA designation process should be based on the principle of co-creation, whereby all relevant stakeholders are involved in the designation process from the earliest possible stage to ensure that all sectors concerned are considered during designation. So that recommendation was in support of submissions that were made from the fishing organisations at that time in particular. I just want to say that we've had really bad practice in Ireland of marine planning when it came to offshore renewable energy on the East Coast, and that led to all sorts of judicial challenges and environmental concerns. That's how not to do business, in my view. The DMAPS process is one that I think has been a big step in the right direction. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. But one thing I want to highlight is, connected to all of that DMAPS process, is the establishment in May 2022 of the Seafood Offshore Renewable Energy Working Group, chaired by Captain Robert McCabe. And I want to get the department's views on the work of that group. Do they hold that as a model that should be continued now when we look at marine protected areas? For me, there's immense potential in our marine resource, but it is a shared resource, and we have many of the stakeholders here today who are very concerned about it for one reason or another. And I do believe we can achieve our objectives both from an environmental perspective, both from creating wealth, creating energy, but we need to do it with everybody at the table. And the thing that infuriates me is when you designate an area but without consultation. You just say, that's where it's going to be, what's your views? That's how you lose the room. So I just want to get a sense from the department, is it your objective from the get-go to have that type of model, co-creation, continued? And I also want to get the views of the fishing organisations and the environmental organisations. Do they support the principle of co-creation as recommended by the previous committee? So thank you.
Thanks very much, Deputy, for that question. And maybe just before I answer you, Deputy, could I just say for Deputy Whitmore, I didn't come back in at the end, but I'm happy to provide a more detailed explanation of the process around the South Coast DMAP. It would be helpful because there's quite a lot there that we could get into, but I can provide that afterwards if that's of help. Thank you. So, Deputy, absolutely. From like a policy perspective from the department, we kind of fully support the principle of co-creation for marine protected areas. If I take a step back from where the legislation is, and I can speak to that in a minute, we want this to work. We want this to work really well. The only way it can work well is by including everybody in the development, the design, the creation and the management of marine protection. I think that's really clear. So that's, I think, a fundamental principle that underpins how we are approaching this. And the inclusivity, I think, is really, really important. So there are a number of steps to the DMAP process that allow for that. And I suppose these are important that we can step these out. Firstly, there's a proposal. And a proposal sets out what we're trying to achieve. What are we trying to protect? and it sets out how we will protect that. So that proposal can really speak to the principles of co-creation and co-management of an MPA. The framework is there in the DMAP process, and we might have to, strengthen it a little bit for the MPA process, but they're the fundamental principles of it. In addition to the proposal, there's another detailed statutory document that needs to be created called a public participation statement. And again, this is really important because it sets out how you will consult through the development and the creation of that marine protected area, and who you will consult with and what format that might take. That can be as prescriptive as needs be, but it doesn't have to be top down. What I mean is that it could be bespoke for the type of marine protected area you're looking at. So you addressed a model there, a very useful model in terms of the seafood ORE group, which I'm happy to speak to. But what we would like to see is that depending on the designation and the design of a particular MPA and the approach taken to a particular MPA, there might be slightly different tools that are needed. And the public participation statement and the proposal allow that flexibility. So we're probably saying it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but the framework allows the adaptability for the marine protected area to be created in the best possible way. And the only way it can be created in the best possible way is by including everybody in that discussion. So the principle of that is absolutely embedded in what we're doing. So I'd like to reassure yourself and deputies that is there. It is there in the proposal already. It's there in the legislation already for the DMAP process, and it's how we deploy that and how we use that effectively is kind of in our gift, and to do that collectively. So the principles around that are absolutely fundamental to how we want to develop marine protection, and that's why we're using the particular approach to adapt that DMAP process. The DMAP process is plan-led, but it's hugely inclusive. And it allows that scope and that flexibility for public participation. So it's bottom-up rather than top-down. So the tools are there for that, and we would put that architecture in place through the legislation, and then the implementation of that through the various processes I think would follow. So I hope that answers that part of the question. To turn to the model of the seafood ORE group.
Just to be clear, I'm asking for your comments on the model of the ORE seafood group. I'm not asking that is exactly the model that would be used for MPAs, but as a model, you clearly broadly support the principle of it.
Yeah, as a model, I think it has worked very effectively for that particular industry, and the seafood industry, and it has evolved over time. I'm not saying that an absolute replication of that is the appropriate model for development of MPAs. Part of it may be, but there may be other more suitable engagement for it. And from the department perspective, we're very open to the right model that works. I come back to the point that we want this to work and to work well. And for us, we're inclusive in that, and we're certainly open to the best models and the kind of agile approach to deliver that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. If I could just get feedback from the other participants, sorry, but thanks for a substantive response. I appreciate it. I'll ask I know that the fishing organisations will absolutely support co-creation, so maybe the environmental organisations first and then the fishing organisation.
Thank you, Deputy, and I'm really glad to hear what Rory just said there, because I completely agree. One of our key asks of the forthcoming legislation, and I mentioned it already, is the high quality stakeholder engagement and participation, and that is the basis of co-creation and co-management as well. Needs to be principled, high quality, based on the principles that we suggest: transparency, inclusiveness, fairness, and early and ongoing. And that early part, I think, is really important. Engagement of stakeholders supported by the delivery milestones, timelines, and certainty, which you might expect. And I met with some of the POs in Killybegs earlier this year, and that's something that we absolutely agree on. There's examples all around the world of successful MPAs, and they all have one thing. One of the things that they all have in common is that stakeholder engagement, co-creation, and the support of the coastal communities, the industries, businesses, local people. That's what makes successful MPA, or at least is a very important aspect of a successful MPA. And just to your initial point, Deputy, our experience talking when we're out and about in the coastal communities, and we get that feedback a lot about the Natura 2000 sites, about there being a lack of stakeholder engagement, and it breeds, quite honestly, it breeds frustration, and it also breeds, I think, kind of a disillusionment or disenfranchisement with the SACs and SPAs themselves and their objectives, which is ultimately to protect nature, of which these same people and communities broadly support, or fully support, I should say. But the lack of consultation there has severely limited, I suppose, the potential in those sites. Not sure if there's any of my colleagues want to add to that.
Yeah, could I add to that as well, exactly what Donal was saying there? Like, a lot of trust has been broken in how previous Natura sites have been designated, and you know, they're not being effectively managed, so we're not seeing the benefits to nature, the benefits to fisheries, but people are getting caught under layers of bureaucracy as well, and having difficulty with, you know, even doing small works to small piers and things like that. So I can understand the mistrust in communities around this, because they haven't been listened to and they're not seeing benefits. So yeah, we would like fully support the bottom-up approach, where the coastal communities, the people using the areas, are brought in from the very beginning and are part of the ongoing management. Otherwise, the area is not going to work. But there are good examples of that around the world where this bottom-up approach has really worked.
I would just say that actually one of the key reasons there have been concerns about the designations, especially in relation to the Natura sites, is because they have not been implemented properly. They have not been funded properly. There has not been, and that bottom-up approach is absolutely possible within the directives. And it's all about management and allowing and government to fund the implementation on the ground. And that, I think, is probably a key message going forward, because if government is not funding the Natura 2000 network properly, and how are they going to commit to funding MPAs? So really, they are the jewels in the crown, if you want. People, fishers who are involved in as well as farmers on land who are involved in Natura sites and have the responsibility to take care and to mind, I suppose, or guardian these habitats and species. They have not been given the resources that they should be given to undertake that management. And this is across agriculture as well. It's a very There's a huge opportunity here to fund this properly, and when we get onto the nature restoration law, if we do in relation to this, we have a massive opportunity for farmers and fishers to be involved, to be able to be funded to do this. So I think it's an implementation problem that is in relation to the Natura sites.
Thank you. I'm going to go to, there'll be an opportunity to come back.
I just want to make a brief summary. I promise it's a brief summary. I'm not going to.
We're already a minute and 30 seconds overhead.
I'll be 20 seconds. I'll be 20 seconds.
You might be 20 seconds. Will the response be 20 seconds?
I lost my 20 seconds.
Okay? Yeah.
By arguing with me, we lost 20 seconds.
So,
anyway.
Sorry, I'll have to be consistent. We have a full house, Deputy. Deputy Ward.
This is where Seafood Ireland Alliance. Can you describe your members' awareness of the existing protected area network, and how has fishing impacted by MPAs so far? John.
Thank you, Deputy. Yeah, I mean, our members would be reasonably well aware of the SPAs and SACs that exist. And in some instances, they are impacted. You know, there are certain restrictions on different types of fisheries, particularly in the inshore areas, like off of County Wexford and in Tralee Bay. There are restrictions on different types of fisheries. So they're very aware of those type of things. What they don't want to see is a top-down approach, which I hope in this room I hear we're trying to avoid, where we have full stakeholder involvement and all stakeholders get to participate in the co-design and co-creation of these marine protected areas. The one thing we don't want to see as a fishing industry is a whole raft of marine protected areas that have high potential to make things worse. That is where we don't want to be. You need to, when you're selecting a marine protected area, you need to use a fairly well-established best practice multi-criterion analysis process, where each layer is measured for its own merits. You know, so if you for instance see an area where there's high levels of fishing, and why are there high levels of fishing? Because that's where the fish congregate in that area. That's not to say there's not fish in other areas, but if you move the concentration of fishing to another area, you may extend and increase the effort that is on the ground, rather than trying to minimise it while catching your allowable catch. That's what we don't want to see, and we want to be fully involved in the new MPA life process, and we will be, but we do want to be kept involved. We don't want a lot of the preceding development of SPAs and SACs and even the South Coast DMAP weren't done in a fully transparent format. You know, we would like to see full transparency and have a full input into the design and the establishment of these marine protected areas, which we fully support once they're done in the right manner.
So I'll just move on.
Sorry, can I just come in for 1 second, please? I'm involved in fishing, and my generations of families involved in fishing for generations, right? So we operate in an SAC producing aquaculture and mussels. My son's right at it now for 40 years. And we work with the departments and everything else. Our problem is that there isn't enough resources, not just to us, but to the departments themselves. I've had a licence in that area in 40 years, 2 10-year licences. My son is waiting for his licence for 5 years for an environmental assessment to be done so that he can continue to work inside in the area. 5 years waiting for the licence to be gone. But this isn't, as John said, we are working inside there. Generations of us going back hundreds of years that are working in the marine environment. It's our part of our job. And we're there and we're proud of what we're doing inside there. We take huge offence that we are now being told, because of our activities, that it is assumed that we are destroying the environment in which we work. It is a real slight, and I would like people to consider this. There's a lot of fishermen who have been lost. In the last week, we had 2 boats gone. And those families listen to these debates and they don't appreciate it when they're being told that their loved ones were destroying their environments. And that is one of the messages that I was asked to give here today. Thanks, Deputy.
Okay, so this moves nicely on to the next question. Would you support the introduction of localised no-take zones protecting, for example, spawning grounds?
Not only, Deputy, do we say we do it, we actually do that. So we have a very protective area that we actually had to fight the Russians out of, the Porcupine Bank, to make sure that we protected that area in military exercises. And we impose a self-regulating closure system on ourselves from May till October, John, isn't it?
Yeah, in the Porcupine Bank, the Irish fishing industry self-regulates a de facto closure for the spawning period for the NEFROPs. Other countries, unfortunately, don't participate. I think, yeah, also on your question, Deputy, on spawning areas and MPAs as such, I think, you know, the fishing industry has been proactive in the past in protecting spawning areas for cod, for instance, in the Irish Sea and in the Celtic Sea. Now, cod have other issues, but the spawning areas for that species at the correct time of the year was protected by a full closure. So, in other words, MPAs can not only be spatial, but it can also be temporal. You know, that's the point.
Okay, just one final one now. There are regions of Ireland's exclusive economic zone that are mostly exploited by foreign vessels rather than the Irish fleet. And what would be the likely impact of placing MPAs in these regions?
Well, Deputy, we keep pointing this out, that the Irish fishermen take 15% of the fish out of our own waters. And as John has just pointed out, a measure that we've implemented to protect that very valuable stock outside in the Porcupine is still open for other vessels. We try and work with our colleagues in other countries. It is closed for 1 month. So to answer your question, fishermen are putting in technical measures. And we met with the Taoiseach of this country in Castletownbere, and we had a member inside there. And when the Taoiseach asked him what his job was, this is how he described his job. My job now is to design fishing nets to avoid catching fish. That is how much we are trying to do to make sure that there's a future there, because this is for ourselves. It is in our best interest to protect the marine environment and the areas in which we work and the spawning grounds that are there. But you have raised a real complexity here, is that we are doing our best, but it's not seen as that for the Irish fishermen. We are in serious trouble with the cuts that are there, but I keep ascertaining this. We get 15%, we get 7% of the hake. We have an issue with sole in 7F&G where there's 450 tonnes allocated to one single country, whereas our fishermen are given 28. So when you put in a technical measure to prevent or reduce the Irish catching sector, unless that is applied in the other countries who have maybe 10 times our amount, 20 times our amount of fish, then it doesn't really get the benefits that you might see here. But we appreciate all the help that's there. But definitely fishermen, since I have been involved, and my previous people, are always trying to modify and make the gear better, catch the fish that you're entitled to catch and legally entitled to catch. But it is really difficult when you're the smallest player in the field out there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just go on there. Fair Season Coalition 2030. I would like to know your opinion of the MPA stakeholders consultation so far, and why do you think the process on the MPA legislation has stalled? It's open to any is.
Thank you, Deputy. Yeah, I'll take a go at that and then pass over to my colleagues. So I suppose the thing to say is the full process of new MPAs under the new national legislation has really begun, because we haven't got that far yet, unfortunately. We're still waiting now on the general scheme of the proposed legislation. So I suppose there hasn't been a process there, certainly a public process. Fair Seas engages with the department to a very good relationship with the department and engages on these issues. But the stakeholder engagement that we mentioned earlier that is so important, I suppose, hadn't really begun. And I suppose that also is a frustration that we hear in communities as well, because there's been a lot of talk about the MPA legislation and the need for new MPAs. A lot by us, admittedly, over this past 4 or 5 years. That's our role, I suppose, in a way. But with no progress on a legislative basis, there's nothing really for communities or for people and for groups and that really to engage with. So there's an absence there, I suppose, that we talked about with the Natura 2000 sites, in that engagement on specific sites. And because we're waiting on the legislation, there is an absence there of being able to engage in MPAs under the new national legislation. So I forget the second aspect of your question there.
The second aspect of it was, where are we? Sorry, I've got it here. Second aspect of it was the progress and the legislation has stalled.
Very, and I said that in my opening statement that I very much feel like it's stalled. We were in here almost exactly 3 years ago speaking to the Joint Oireachtas Committee then that was mentioned earlier about the general scheme of the standalone legislation, and we're now at the stage where we're waiting for the general scheme of the new legislation to be published. So I want to just acknowledge that we know there's been a significant amount of work done in the background by the department, including people behind me here, that have been very engaged in working on this for a number of years, much longer than we have. But publicly facing and for the important part of the legislative process, we're no further forward, and that's a disappointment. And in terms of meeting our 30 by 30 targets, I think that I'm on record at various conferences and presentations I've given saying I'm ocean optimistic about us being able to meet our 30 by 30 targets, but really if we don't have progress in this legislation soon, then I think that optimism is slowly slipping away and we're in real danger of missing our targets. I don't know if some of my colleagues...
Thanks very much. We'll actually go to Deputy Cooney now is the next speaker, and his 10 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. And again, thank you all for your opening statements. Can the department outline whether a marine protected area supported by the necessary ecological evidence could independently provide a lawful basis for restricting or stopping commercial fishing by large vessels which is 6 nautical miles, for example, in the Shannon estuary? Should the policy directive banning such activity be successfully challenged in the courts?
Thank you, Deputy, for that question. I think the purpose and I suppose the principal objective of marine protected areas is to, benefit and enhance marine biodiversity and the marine environment for those benefits for all. And that's the objectives that we're working towards in it. In respect of fishing as part of that, I think we spoke earlier around, the design and the creation of these MPAs will be done in consultation for the betterment of all, and we'd hope the benefits for all as well. So they're the kind of principles that we're working towards. In terms of fisheries policy specifically, it's not a competence of our department and a policy area for our department. So all of the legislation will be done will be kind of created and drafted from our perspective that will align with what the legislation exists already from a fisheries perspective. So we have to show faith to that in respect of what we're developing in our legislation through marine protection, and aligning that with what exists already from a fisheries policy perspective. We don't have the policy ownership in respect of that fisheries piece within the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. What we're focusing on is implementing a procedure and developing an MPA network that has, I think, benefits for all. And that those benefits are derived from participation by everybody in the process.
Yes, yeah.
Deputy, I can just maybe offer a comment on that as well, if that's okay. Your question is whether there could be restrictions on larger vessels due to proximity or entrance into a special protection area in SIC. I believe that's your question.
Yes, correct, yeah.
If the fishing activities were subject to an appropriate assessment of those activities, then yes, it depends on the actual assessment outcome, on the impacts to the qualifying interests, and Shannon estuary would be very important for dolphins. So therefore, there's the potential, yes, I would say, if that activity was assessed.
So there would actually be concern.
I mean, it's, you know, when you do an appropriate assessment, you're looking at all of the activity, what you know, the volume of fish being taken out, what are the impacts then to the species in question, and the knowing what the ecology is of that species and how they are dependent on certain maybe a biomass of fish in that area. So through the process, if that process is in place, then yes, it could be, it is a tool that could be used, yes.
Thank you. Now, I presume Seafood Ireland, from a conservation perspective, do you believe that the different levels of protection within the MPA framework can be applied in a phased or adaptive way to support the recovery of marine ecosystems, while also enabling a substantial inshore small boat fisheries over time? Could an approach that begins with higher protection, allowing no or very limited fishing, and then gradually adjust protection levels in response to demonstrable improvements in conservation conditions, be considered compatible best practice conservation principles? What would your views?
I think essentially the short answer is more or less yes. The principles that we would follow, or we would like to see followed here, are that we work together, we identify the features. When we have the features identified, we know what the threats are against those features, whether that feature is a physical feature or a fish stock or whatever. So we identify those features, and then we would design the management of a marine protected area in order to protect that feature. So if you're trying to protect something on the bottom, it's obvious. You know, if you're trying to protect something that's on the surface, like seabirds or whatever, you have a different set of solutions. And I think, you know, when we enter into this process of co-designing these MPAs, I think that's the space we need to get into, where we identify between us, firstly, what are the features we need to protect, and then how do we protect them. After that, you're looking at areas, and when you look at areas, you need to consider the socio-economic impact of that on the existing activities within that area, Deputy. And I think in that scenario, we need to have a proper and full socio-economic impact assessment for each of these MPAs to identify potential losses for any seafood activity that is going on there, and how do we replace those losses to that sector while still establishing our MPAs and protecting our features. That's the task at hand. How do we ensure the established income of these operators within an area is either allowed to continue or is replaced to allow a full and proper coexistence to occur. between the marine protected areas and the existing activities that are in those areas. Thank you.
Yeah, so to broaden out your question for me is, first of all, you have to identify the impacts of what the fishing activity is inside in an area. Like, as you said, big boats versus small boats. First of all, you evaluate what is the difference between a big boat and a small boat. So you'd start there, because without that knowledge or data, then you can't act. If one boat is using just a smaller net but taking the same amount of fish, but he's doing it more regular than the other boat, then the impact is the same. So I think that answers one aspect of your question. And the other aspect of your question is you're asking what's our views on the industry on this. When this came about first, we actually were the only producer organisation, the Irish South and West, to come up with a paper that we wanted to sit down with all the people that are around us here to form a management plan. Because if you don't form a management plan, then what you're saying is there should be no fishing. So if you're saying there should be no fishing, that's a different conversation that we're having. As John just said, these people like myself have fished for generations, and we've continued to do. And every time a law or a new regulation comes in, if we don't comply, we're put in jail for that. So we want to work, as John said, with the development of many management strategies that will allow us to continue to do what our ancestors and our family members have done before us. We don't see that what we're doing is bad. Now, of course, do we adapt and change throughout the years and adapt what's going on around us? Of course, that's the same. Fishermen use different type of nets. They go to different size areas. They use different boats because they have to access different fish and different opportunities. If fish are inside in an area and it's only available in that area, to say that a small boat can go in there, fair enough. But to say that the small boat is going in there because he's going to do less damage than the bigger boat, then you'll have to show that. What you're doing is you're actually denying the bigger boat for going into somewhere he's going for maybe 40 or 50 years, just because he seems to be bigger and can be seen more from the shore than the smaller vessel. That's the issue that we have. So we want managed fisheries. We want to be able to continue to manage fisheries. We have actually been frustrated by the changes that has come from the cuts to our fish stocks in Irish waters, where we weren't part of the consultation with the Commission, the European Commission, on new changes to fishing gear and methods, because we would have improved them and increased them, because we don't think they're adequate enough. But we want them applied not just to our fleet, as we've pointed out, but to other fleets in other jurisdictions, because we then will do the work, but others will benefit, because we've 15%, they have 85%. So if we recover the stocks, they get 85%. So we believe they should share the burden. So does that answer the question, Deputy?
Yes, that answers the question, and thank you very much.
Lee
Okay.
Cooney, Fair Seas, just wanted to respond to that question as well.
Thank you, Deputy. Yes, we've also called for the legislation to define the different protected areas categories, because there is a difference between a fully no-take zone and those areas which do allow varying levels of extractive activities. And we would agree with what John has said about ensuring that each site has its own individual and specific detailed management plan, and taking those decisions on a case-by-case basis and considering which activities impact the environmental objectives for certain sites, and then taking that ecosystem-based approach to look at the full ecosystem, whereas the SPAs and SACs that exist now are features-based, just looking at those specific features, whereas we would call for a full look at the entire ecosystem of specific sites. But again, those specific detailed management plans are very important for that, and determining the different levels of protection within each.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response.
Deputy Connolly.
Thanks, Chairperson. Could I just ask for a response from the department officials to, I suppose, I don't know what you call it, an allegation or a charge that the existing protection areas are not being effectively managed? I'm not sure, is the charge such that we feel the conservation objectives are not being met? But what's your own sense of that?
Deputy, are you referring to the existing network and designations?
Yeah, so the existing areas, protection areas, I mean, the sense from the groups in front of you is that they're not being effectively managed. I'm not sure if I've heard that you're saying the conservation objectives are not being met, but I'm just looking for a response to that.
Yeah, like I think from our perspective, obviously, as we set out, the the competent authority for those designations is the National Parks and Wildlife Service. So it's not something that we are responsible for from a line department perspective. I think it's like everything. The maritime environment is complex. There are always processes and and I think things we can do better. And I think it's probably down to that kind of, I suppose, that collective approach to achieving that. So I wouldn't say that you'd have to go into the specifics of each site. So you may have many sites where constant objectives are being met. You may have other sites where they're not in the status that people might desire them to be in. There could be many factors for that. So I would be reluctant to give a categorical one side or no side. I think it demonstrates the complexity of what we're operating in and the complexity of the maritime governance and designation process in respect of that, Deputy. I hope that addresses it as honestly as I can in that respect.
Hands up there.
Thanks, Deputy. I just think it's important to clarify about the vibe that there's an issue with the Natura sites. Birdwatch Ireland believes that the Natura sites are absolutely critical and essential to the conservation of wild birds, but also under the Habitats Directive then for other species and habitats. But it is the case. There was a fitness check done of the Birds and Habitats Directive back in 2017, and it was seen that these laws are fit for purpose, but that there's an issue with implementation and for funding their implementation. And what that means is, Mr. Murphy, he said, oh, his son is trying to get a licence, they need to do an ecological assessment. We need staff in government departments, in the competent authorities, to be there to do these assessments, to make sure that things are done properly. We also need management plans to be put in place. We need the conservation objectives to have measures that are actually implementable. So these are all things that Ireland has been very poor as a country, as a government, with doing over decades. The marine SPAs, for example, should have been put in place since 1998. This is a real failing that we haven't done it so far. We haven't done it yet. And we only have 2 candidate marine SPAs for seabirds now, and they're not even full SPAs yet. So to me, it's about implementation. It's about putting the resources behind and to make those processes that trickle down onto the ground to people who might have an issue locally, or they want to do something the right way and they don't know how. It's all about staffing and resourcing and the proper plans put in place to make sure that things are done well. And that is also incentivising people as well for their actions. So there's a huge scope for this to be done properly, but we really need government to act on that.
Could I come in quickly with a remark? Agree with everything that Una said there about the implementation and the money to do this as well. And it isn't just a feeling that we have, that these areas haven't been managed correctly. The latest Article 17 report of the Habitats Directive was made publicly available there just before Christmas. And the habitats that are within that, there's many marine ones. Only 2 of them reached good environmental status. All the rest were in unfavourable status or bad status, and they're declining as well. So, that's just proof there that what we're doing so far isn't working, and we do need to look at alternative ways.
So there's 2 more we're looking to contribute to.
Yeah, so it's for you, Deputy Connolly, to determine what questions you want to put and to whom you want to respond. So you're in charge of your block of 10 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy. And I'm going to read 2 very short paragraphs because they were in my fuller opening statement, but they're directly relevant to your question. So in June 2023, the Court of Justice of the European Union ruled that Ireland breached its obligations under the EU Habitats Directive, identifying failures by Ireland to designate SACs, set site-specific conservation objectives and establish necessary conservation measures. And what I say here is I think that underlines the urgency to not only manage our existing MPAs effectively, which we're not necessarily doing at the minute. I think the Court of Justice ruled on that. But we also need to ensure that the new legislation is ambitious, resourced and is implemented effectively, just like my colleagues have been saying.
Thanks, Deputy. I just want to clarify something in case I gave the wrong impression. We've been active in our bay for the last 40 years, and we have changed our practices to be more kind to the environment. We haven't changed the actual structures that we've there. We made them bigger, but the way that we operate is the same as I started 40 years ago. It's on long lines, growing mussels. We test our waters every week, and we make sure that there's no minerals or heavy things, and we protect the environment around us. And we are so good at it, we're actually proud to say, with the help of BIM, that we've received MSC certification and also organic certification. So that's where we move to. The frustration is, as what has been identified by some of the people speaking here, is the actual resources around it. We've done nothing wrong, we've changed nothing inside in our bay. It's just the processing of the information that's there that needs to be fast forwarded, because it has a direct impact on us in accessing funding or to develop or grow our industry inside in the bays. For my sons that is committed to it for the last 10 years. I am not saying what we're doing inside in the bay is harming the bay, the opposite. We are making sure that water is pristine. We're Class A waters, and we have to protect it for our market, so we have to do the right things inside in the bay. And we were there years ago, but I'll just tell you how scary this can be for a fisherman. When we did start talking about this, when I was my young fella's age, when I was 21, when the National Parks and Wildlife came down to us and we just started our business and we were just getting off the ground, when we were hearing some of the language that we hear today, when I asked this question to the National Parks and Wildlife person, I said a very simple question. Are you saying that a seagull now is more important than me and has more rights than me inside in the bay? And they said yes. So that's a scary thing for fishermen and for people who have been doing this and their families before them. We are willing to work. John has outlined it quite clearly of how much we are willing to sit down with these good people here alongside us, and has been proven with the Seafood Authority. But some of the information that you get in our presentation meets that it depends on what is given priority in the assessment. Yeah, if we're not given priority, then we're not going to get the same protections as other priorities. Thanks, Deputy.
You know, our oceans are taking up an awful lot of the carbon emissions that we are emitting across the globe at the moment. Our oceans do so much for us in terms of regulating weather and providing food, including fish. And there's no one, I mean, that is very unfortunate that somebody said that the goal is more important than a person. And this is where the proper implementation works things out, and where plans can be put in place and measures can be resourced and people can be incentivised if there's extra training need. This is, I mean, it's actually a potential for so much hope when things are done well. But we've never protected nature well in Ireland, not on the land or in the sea. We've never done it properly. We've never resourced it. We've never had a proper budgeting for the National Parks and Wildlife Service, but also the other competent authorities like Department of Agriculture, because they're the competent authority as well in some areas, including in the marine and fisheries. All of these resourcing is required to make it easier and to work these problems out.
Can I just ask, it's a straightforward question, the current 9%, I'm familiar with the Galway Bay Complex SAC, where else are they around the country, where are the other areas that are protected at the moment? Have we a map of them? Yeah. But that's the birds, that's the bird, that's theirs. Sorry, that's their map. So those maps aren't, that's not the existing protected areas, no. That's the ones that are, yeah, so where are the existing ones?
I might address that, Deputy. Yeah, they're around the coast and offshore.
Yeah, but like as I said, I'm familiar with the Galway Bay Complex SAC. So where else do we have similar protected areas?
There's actually, again, I'll say that we're not the competent authority for this, but if you look at the NPWS website, there's a protected sites map, and you can view all the sites. But they're essentially largely coastally based. Yeah, of course. We're talking about large bays like Galway Bay. Yeah,
Galway Bay, I'm assuming is one of the bigger ones now because it's a substantial area there.
Correct.
And I'm saying it's taken up a fair proportion of the 9%.
Well, when we're measuring the percentages, you're looking at the whole MSFD area. So that's like around 460,000 square kilometres. So those sites might be large in a coastal sense, but when you look at the whole EEZ, it's a small percentage. So the more recent candidate sites or proposed sites have been offshore, 2 large sites for reef and 2 bird foraging areas which are proposed in the Irish Sea in the southeast, which Una has mentioned.
Thank you. Deputy Cahill, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I too would like to welcome our guests here today. I believe the publication of the long-delayed marine protected areas legislation is vital. There has been already delay after delay since the Marine Protected Areas Bill was first promised by to be published back in 2023 by your colleague, Minister Noonan, the then Minister. We are still waiting for the new MPA legislation, an amendment to the Marine Area Planning Act. Minister Dooley said the heads of bill would be seen by Christmas, then it was early New Year. Now it has already been pushed out to mid-2026, and you know, there is a worrying trend and kind of sequence of delays here. The legislation must be prioritised and published so that the work of engagement, research and designations of marine protected areas can begin. Just to say there as well that, you know, as we all know, Ireland has committed to protecting 30% of its seas by 2030, and for this to be done thoroughly and fairly and based on strong science and community co-design, then it should not be rushed. Therefore, I believe that the sooner the legislation is published, the better. I propose that we, you know, write to the Minister, as in we, the committee, and ask him to proceed with the publishing as ASAP. I believe it is just simply too important to allow this to delay any further. I just want to avail of the opportunity yet again to raise something that I've spoken at length on in here, and that's the delays in the processing of aquaculture licenses and the delays in the processing of the renewal of aquaculture licenses. And I do hope that we will see significant improvements in the timeframes in 2026.
So you made a proposal, Deputy Carroll, and I'm happy to action that. I think it's a sensible one. We can write to the Minister. Was there something there in particular you wanted to address to one of the witnesses, or should we move on?
Well, if anybody wants to come back, but I think it's time to push on, like, you know, okay. This, and it's so important. I mean,
well, I see some of the witnesses indicating, so maybe they might want to respond.
You know, it's a different world out there at sea, and it's a beautiful world, and you know, I believe we need to protect it.
Okay, so we'll take witnesses in turn. We'll go with Fair Seas, Ireland 2030, and then we'll go to the fisheries organisations and the department in that order. So just keep it very brief, please.
Yeah, just wanted to make a quick comment that yes, absolutely agree with you. You know that we do need to do this quickly, and it was we were disappointed to hear that the release of the general scheme wouldn't happen until mid-2026. Because we're getting very close to 2030 and we have our 30% marine protected area target to meet, but also under the nature restoration law, there are restoration targets that need to be met as well by 2030. So yes, we would like this to be done quickly, but not at the expense of, you know, not having the proper engagement with all of the stakeholders, because that's going to take a lot of time, and not at the expense of the potential bill being weaker than it should be. And we'd also like time factored in to make sure that there's pre-legislative scrutiny done as well, so that all the stakeholders get a chance to properly look and see what there is within the bill and get the chance to work with the department and with the government for any changes that might be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to highlight to the committee there's a 2024 Sustainable Development Report which was published by the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and it ranked Ireland 28th out of 166 countries in terms of the overall progression towards the SDGs, and one of the actual SDGs that was pointed out as a specific barrier to Ireland was SDG 14, life below water, because of our slow progress towards proper, robust marine protected areas legislation. So we have an opportunity, and when we talk about 2030 deadlines, 2030 is also the deadline to achieve the SDGs. So we're officially running out of time. I'd also like to note that, with the upcoming EU presidency that Ireland will hold during summertime, it's a good opportunity to really champion the SDG implementation, which would include SDG 14, Life Below Water, building on Denmark's 2025 focus during their presidency, which has included SDG 14. So it's an excellent opportunity for Ireland as a marine nation to really copper fasten what we want to protect now and for future generations in terms of our marine environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. I think John wants to get into, but I'll just give a couple of quick facts to understand. We have 880,000 square kilometres of water around our island. That's 264,000 needs to be designated. Fishes everywhere. But the Marine Institute will give you these statistics. And one of the statistics is that 80% of the fish that's caught is caught in 20% of the grounds. So 20% is caught in the 80. And this comes back to our discussion. Who gets priority? We believe that you should protect the features or specifically target either a fish stock or what you're trying to protect rather than just a broad area. So if you wanted to do a broad area, you could pick the most least impacted, if you decide fishing is the impacted, and go to the least one that's used, and then designate that area. Like, for us, we want to do this properly. We want to make sure that when you're protecting the marine environment, what you're protecting is identified and you actually do that. And not only that, because of climate change, that it's a continuous evolving. Because if the fish move, if that's what we're trying to protect, our water temperatures change, then also your plan and your protection of those marine areas have to adapt to meet those changes. Thanks, Deputy.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Cal, for your comments. And I absolutely agree that we need to encourage the Minister to publish the legislation and start the process as soon as possible, where we design and select these areas and features to be protected. But I would advocate for, when we do start the process, that we do it properly, it's transparent, and that any trade-offs are made open, and that we discuss them and deal with them as they arise. As I said earlier, when you select an area, there is going to be a trade-off in socio-economic terms for the seafood industry, and I think that has to be taken into full consideration. The fisheries and seafood industry has to be fully involved from the start and not left on the sideline as happened in previous iterations. So I can't emphasise enough that the seafood industry needs to be fully involved, and any trade-offs need to be identified and adjusted for. Thank you.
And thanks, Deputy, for the question. I'll be very brief. And absolutely, we hear loud and clear everybody wants to see that legislation, and we're working intensively to deliver that. But it is also important to point out, and as I had set out in the opening statement, that in parallel with the development of the legislation, there's considerable enabling work going on to deliver the MPAs through the MPA Life process and the MPA Life project. So it's not as if nothing is happening. I think that's a really important point. The legislation is one tool, but there's a lot of work being led by Dr. Oliver O'Kyle, my colleague, in respect of that MPA Life project. So if I can reference those two briefly, specifically, two ecological sensitivity analyses have been undertaken by the department and an MPA advisory group with the purpose of identifying suitable areas for MPAs, as well as developing the methods, approaches and standards for identifying such suitable areas. And importantly, a third such analysis of the Atlantic waters to the west and north is now in the process of being established. So these three analyses together, with the support of the MPA advisory group and the LIFE project and the department, will complete an initial examination of possible suitable areas within which possible MPAs may be identifiable and brought forward. But the bringing forward of those possible areas will be done through the legislative and the participatory process that we've heard an awful lot about today, which is really important. So if you can imagine, there's a huge amount of scientific and enabling work being carried out in parallel. The legislation is being worked through, and when those two come together at the end, we're not starting from scratch. the process is well advanced, but really importantly, as we commence that process, we need to ensure that everybody and all of the key stakeholders are on board and actually can work with us in respect of that journey. So that's why that participatory approach through the DMAP process is really pivotal in that. So I think that's a really important kind of context for everybody to kind of be aware of that. The legislation is one arm of it. The work that's going on in parallel with that is really important, and bringing those two together through the participatory processes is really important from the department's perspective to ensure that these things can work and work well. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Senator Boyle.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. And I think starting off, the whole thing is about co-creation, everybody living together and trying to get you know, the best for everybody. But has the department looked at other countries to see what they're doing and what policies they have taken up in their countries that would help us on this? Donald, maybe, or Rory, sorry.
Yeah, thanks very much, Senator, for the question. Yes, like we look and we engage with many other countries and looking at best practice. There's lots of examples out there. So we can absolutely draw on that, and through the various processes we continually engage with colleagues across Europe and that in respect of that. What I would say also is that, you know, we're not, you know, I'm not necessarily advocating for lifting and dropping a process that works elsewhere just into the Irish context. Yeah. And as I mentioned about co-creation, I think from the Irish perspective, we need to be mindful of that. So we can absolutely learn lessons from what works well elsewhere, and we take that on board. But I'm very mindful that the Irish context is particularly different, and that we need to make sure we devise a solution that works for all of the stakeholders from the Irish context as well. So it's probably a little bit of both, Senator, to answer your question.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, there's studies the world over of how well-designed MPAs, particularly with those that combine bottom-up knowledge with scientific evidence and statutory instruments, can deliver the long-term economic benefits for both nature and conservation and fisheries and the economy. Professor Mark Costello, who's an Irishman working out of a university in Norway, did a review in 2024 that looked at 48 examples of specifically fishery-related economic benefits across 25 countries. There wasn't a single example out of all of those that found any evidence of net costs to fisheries because of MPAs. Rather, there were benefits to fisheries, which included increased fish stocks, increased catch volumes, catch per unit effort. A couple of examples we'd like to bring in are from the Azores in Portugal. There was recently designated the largest MPA network in the North Atlantic, which covers 287,000 square kilometres across the seas surrounding the Azores. And a main factor in the development of that network was how collaborative and participatory the approach was. Stakeholder engagement, cross-sectoral stakeholder engagement was embedded throughout the process, including fishers and scientific evidence. The government had more than 40 meetings with that range of stakeholders. So the final design ensured that there was support from everyone, from all of the users of the blue economy there, and they were able to develop that joint solution that met sustainable resource use and conservation. Another key example is from Lyme Bay on the south coast of England that took an ecosystem approach to fisheries management, and again had a combination of local fisher engagement and the top-down legislative structures, and created management committees that included people from across the from the stakeholders. And so those are two examples that we'd point you to.
Thank you very much. And maybe go to Patrick and John here. In your opening statement here, it says the public consultation program process of the SFPD-MPA was little more than a tick boxing exercise, no meaningful engagement. We'd just like to, you know, I think that's what we're all here for, is to engage and try and move the thing forward. John?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Yeah, and look, that was a first DMAP process that we entered into. We felt that the public consultation and the stakeholder involvement wasn't sufficient. However, after the selection of the sites, we did have further engagement, which proved to be more sensible. I think if you look at, I think we need to use that South Coast DMAP as really as a learning exercise in what we're about to undertake. And you know, the one picture that we got from the South Coast DMAP was that a lot of fisheries data wasn't, in our interpretation, wasn't used in the assessment. So in other words, if you take the layers of the South Coast DMAP and take the hard constraints and other constraints and put them all together and leave fisheries out, don't put anything in to do with fisheries, you can identify the 4 sites very clearly on that map. So that led us to believe that fisheries wasn't given due consideration, and spawning areas that were identified by the Marine Institute we felt weren't given the consideration they should have been given. And other different types of fisheries were only considered at a very high level rather than at a more granular level where they need to be to identify different nuances and different fisheries that exist within those areas, and they are there. You know, we need to account for them. Thank you.
And just when I am with you, what compensation or transaction support does the Alliance advocate for the small fishermen, you know, under the new MPA? You
see, this is where the science and the data and the evaluation of what people are doing in any other walk of life, if you're going to be discommoded, even if somebody puts a roadway down through your garden, you get compensated. Unfortunately for fishermen, we're not deemed as the owners of the ground in which we work. We're only visitors, and as such, very little rights are afforded to us, despite the fact that we have to have a legal entitlement to go out there. We have to have our licence, our authorisations, and our boats have to be up to scratch. And not only that, our crew qualified and enabled and certified to be able to do the job that they're doing. So to come back with that, Deputy, all we want to do is fish. And I just want to put some figures again that I always bring to this discussion. When I started in fishing, there was 37 boats fishing out of Baltimore. There's 3 or 4 now. And we're seeing this replicated around the coastline, and not just for the bigger boats, but for smaller boats. And now we hear from our smaller colleagues that with the big boats gone, they're going to be impacted because the fish that they were catching as a byproduct was going to them to allow them to catch their species as bait, and now that's disappearing as well. So if you were actually starting this 20 years ago, we would have been way happier, because the sacrifice we've made in the last 20 years is our numbers have gone down by 63%. So we're already leaving the field. You know, if we're deemed as the ones that are doing damage, no other industry has had the sacrifices that we have made than any other industry or any other changes. 63% of our vessels have gone in 21 years alone. So this is what we're talking about. You know, we're talking about protecting other species and things, and quite rightly, absolutely, we believe in that. But fishermen need to be included in that conversation, because before you know it, we'll be gone. And it's something I believe that we should be protecting, not just the animals and birds and stuff, but our heritage, the people that are there, you know, the historic nature of it, and the families that have risked all and have paid the ultimate price in some tragic cases where they've lost family members and still go out to sea. You know, I'm going to quote a very prominent man in the industry from Castletown Bear, John Nolan. He said the worst thing he had to do was to go up to a family and knock on the door to tell them the news before they got it, that one of their family members was lost at sea. And he said, you know what was remarkable? Once the funeral was over, that family member that he spoke to went to sea the following day to bring in more fish for, you know, like, who would do it? So I just want to be conscious of that, is that when we're talking about this, this really has an impact on fishermen and families and people around their coastline, and they're struggling as they are. And they are willing to sit down, as Rory has said, in fairness, with the groups that we've put together. We'd like to see them being more involved. And as John said, it depends on what you prioritise is what you're trying to protect. And we felt in that comment that at the start, our activities, what we were catching outside there, wasn't put up high enough to determine what areas you'd pick. But John did, and I let him come in. He's trying to come in there himself to address that.
Well, I wasn't trying to cut you off, sorry. Yeah, I think the important thing here, Senator, is that you know, fisheries and fishermen and the seafood industry as a whole need not to be seen as a problem or something that needs to be you know, to be told you have to move here or move there, or we have enough regulations in the fishing industry as it is, that I think the fishing industry or the seafood industry needs to be seen as part or all of the solution. And I think when you speak about mitigation or compensation for inshore fisheries, I think those fishermen, and I'm not sure, one of the people in front of me said, I think it was Unas mentioned it earlier, that the small scale fishermen or even larger scale fishermen could be part of the ongoing monitoring of these MPAs and resources, and just be part of the process as opposed to being something outside of the process that has to be managed. And I think that's where the solution is, and that's where we need to find these mitigations and other forms of what I would call replacing the income that may be displaced when we select these areas. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Noonan. And Senator Noonan, just to let you know, it's 10 minutes, and during those 10 minutes you put your questions, leave time for the responses, and direct your questions to the particular witness you want to hear from. If you feel that somebody's going on too long and eating into the remainder of your time, you can interject yourself.
Thanks, Cahill. And I thank the committee for allowing me to I'm not a member of this committee, but I do thank, and again, just to thank the witnesses, and first of all, just to say that I'm reassured by Rory's comments just in relation to the co-design. I certainly know with the standalone bill, when we did run aground with it, we were clear in trying to design in that public participation element, that co-design element, from the outset, and certainly when we met up in the car park in Killybegs during COVID, when we had those early public engagement pieces, that this was coming out loud and clear through Professor Crow's report, but also in the piece of public engagement that we did. And I did have concerns that not running with the standalone legislation, first of all, would cause delays, but secondly, that it would be more difficult to get that public participation into it. So I really do welcome their very strong comments, and I do welcome the fact that they will appear in this legislation as well. I think that co-creation, I think all of the members have spoken to that. It's hugely important. I want to go back to a question, perhaps first of all, a number of questions to Oliver, just in relation to the MPA Life. And could the MPA Life project lead out on other elements, such as establishing those committees, those coastal committees, local committees that would be involved in this iterative process of not just the design but the management of those of MPAs in localities?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. Absolutely. The MPA Life project is it's a 9-year project. It's worth 25 million, 10 of which is coming from government, and a key component of a key work package of the LIFE project is actual local implementation. So there's provision there for us to essentially mobilise staff on the ground at a local level from the very get-go. So that is part of our vision. Absolutely, we want to have all sorts of MPAs of varying degrees of protection, varying degrees of action, but also very much from the bottom up, co-created, co-designed, and as appropriate to the things we're trying to protect, also co-manage in that space. So community organisations could be involved, fisheries organisations could be involved. It depends very much on the features we're trying to protect and what targets we're setting, how we're going to protect those things. So.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think you mentioned before previously that perhaps on top of the layer of a network of biodiversity officers we have, that perhaps there could be coastal or marine biodiversity officers in all the coastal counties, and would that be something that perhaps could be given some thought to?
Thank you, Senator. I think we're absolutely open to the long-term enduring nature of marine protected areas, and I suppose the opportunities that they provide and the benefits that they provide. So all of those enduring measures are something that we would be very happy to consider, and as this process evolves. So I would say there are things that we would certainly be very open to. The generational nature and the enduring nature of marine protection is something that's really important, and we want to ensure that we, I suppose, leave that legacy And part of that legacy is the supporting infrastructure that will allow those MPAs to endure into the future. And I think that's a key part of how we'd like to establish that. So all of those things that would support that, particularly in local areas, through coastal communities, the local government structures that we have and that we need to kind of tap into, are things that the department certainly would be very happy to explore and to advance further.
Thanks. And I do think, you know, we've talked a lot about features and species and the mapping out, but there's a big piece of work around the bringing people with us and just that whole element of the social, the cultural, the heritage aspects of it that really need to be brought into this as well. And I think that's what keeps people with us. The other question then just is in relation, and it's come up quite a bit in the Climate Committee, is in relation to the issue around blue carbon and particularly seagrass restoration and the potential for carbon sequestration. And are we missing something in our carbon budgeting by not including seagrasses and again, these are features that you would anticipate might be protected through MPAs?
I might answer that, Deputy. Yeah. Blue carbon is very much part of the landscape that we've been looking at so far, at least in the preliminary work we've been doing on the sensitivity analysis work. So the likes of seagrasses in particular, and also salt marsh. Seagrass is listed as well under the Nature Restoration Regulation. So far we've taken a feature-based approach to these two sensitivity analysis in the Celtic Sea and the Irish Sea, the Western Irish Sea. And I suppose as we develop this sensitivity analysis for the Atlantic as well, we'll be looking again at what features we've already looked at. And I think an important point to make is that on this occasion we're talking also about the Natura 2000 birds and habitats directive, habitats and species, so that we're looking more holistically in this third sensitivity analysis. But I will reiterate a point that's made by the chair of the advisory group on both occasions previously. It's not the MPA process proper because we don't have the legislation in place, but this is preliminary work that we can do to try and balance all of these things and look at what features need to be protected and where might be suitable for protection in the future, so that we have a pipeline of potential or suitable areas with potential MPAs within them that we can bring forward. But engagement, we've taken that message through from the Irish Sea and the Celtic Sea study so far. We're absolutely committed to doing proper engagement early on, and that means in the coming weeks and onwards with this next phase. Thanks.
Okay. And just again, that point was made, I think, by Patrick and John, and I think Una made the point as well, and just in relation to the role that fishers could have in this. And in the same way as on land, we have farm plan schemes for farmers. Could we have a sea plan scheme for fishers, that they could be just involved, not just involved, but actually get a payment and get supported to be involved in monitoring or protecting certain features. And I think that I really think that this could be seen as a positive. And also in the same way as on land, we can't restore nature without farmers. We can't restore nature without fishers either. So I just wonder, is that something that we could give consideration to?
Yeah, and thanks, Senator. And we have met before, and I did ask you one question. If you were looking for information on the sea, who were the first people you would go to? And you did say fishermen. So yes, you're absolutely correct. Nobody knows their environment better than the people that have to survive on it, and that would be fishermen. And we did speak about this as well too in the aquaculture sector, like the amount of carbon we sequester just in our daily operation, you know, taking in, starting from a speck that you can't even see unless it's a microscope, that grows to thousands of tons, and shells and the carbon that it sequesters. So of course you're correct. And the same with the fishermen that want to protect their area and do it. And we see off the Bay of Biscay that fishermen from France are getting paid to protect the cetaceans below there by leaving the area and not. So absolutely fishermen are all for that. But what people have to understand is that it is a business.
Yeah.
And fishermen, according to BIM last year, lost 82% of their profitability. So that's the industry we're in. And like, if nobody believes, then go down to the piers and talk to the fishermen. They tell you themselves. And we are under serious pressure from the loss of opportunities. And of course we'd be willing to talk to anybody else that could diversify us away, like all the other industries you're talking about, to give us an opportunity to benefit the environment, because I keep saying this to people and they don't get it until they hear it. A fish doesn't produce one offspring, it produces thousands. So if you give the environment the chance and that to recover, it'll pay you back thousandfold. But we need to look after our environment, and we definitely would be active participants in that if we were given the opportunity. So thanks, Senator.
Fantastic. Sorry.
Just a quick comment. Would agree completely with compensation being needed in the marine space as well as on land. Absolutely, and that could come from the nature restoration law as well. We haven't been given confirmation of how the nature restoration law is going to be funded, and a lot of the conversation is focused on the land-based aspect of it. But we need to remember that there's also the marine aspect of it. There needs to be money there for marine restoration, for the ongoing management of the protected areas, and then also to support any people that are, might have to change their activities because of it, and fishermen shouldn't have to shoulder like a disproportionate burden in protecting the marine environment as well. So that's a big thing that we need to be talking about, the funding for the NRL.
Thanks. And just the final few seconds I have, I think we need to look at the connectivity of our MPAs with the North Sea. We're talking about migratory species. But the final point I'll make, just in relation, because the issue of resourcing was made, and certainly we put additional resources into the National Parks and Wildlife Service, but we've heard it in relation to ORE, and we're hearing it here again today. I think the MPWS needs to be doubled again. It really doesn't have the resources to deliver on a nature restoration plan and on the requirements around the MPAs. But it's an issue for government, but I think it's a hugely significant one because we're hearing it time and time again. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy Gallagher.
I had a number of questions, but a lot of them, or most of them, are asked and answered, but I would like to thank those who came here today and shared their views with us. Of course, we're all interested in the common good, and it's vitally important that we do protect the resources which we have, but it's also important that we can create wealth, and we can create wealth. And I come from a rural part of Ireland, as do many of you, that we could at one time create a lot more wealth from the sea than we're creating now. And it's also in the interest, and it's been pointed out by one of the organisation's representatives, that it's in the interest to ensure that the environment is first and foremost, because it's of no interest to those who are in the aquaculture if they don't have clear waters. So having said that, bringing me to aquaculture, when applications are submitted to the Department for Aquaculture Licences, do you, some of you, all of you, or none of you make submissions when applications are submitted? Secondly, in relation to offshore wind, and you'll be aware that the targets, government targets are, I think it's 5 gigawatts by 2030, 20 gigawatts by 2040, and it will be climate neutral by 2050. Whoever will be around to witness that, and I'm sure there will be some who will be around to witness that. When applications are to be submitted to, which is now the Commission rather than Board Planning, is there an obligation on the board to inform bodies, as is an obligation on local authorities to inform certain bodies when applications are submitted? So the question is, and maybe I should know this, but I'm sure some will know it, that in Board Planning or the new Commission, are they obliged to inform bodies when applications will be submitted going forward?
I might take that first, maybe from the department's perspective, and then, if that's okay, just in respect of the latter part of your question, Deputy, in respect of a Commission Planada, so there's statutory consultees as part of the process. So there's that's all, I suppose, stitched into the planning framework and the Planning Development Act, etc. And that list is available in terms of who is notified and at what point through the planning process. When it comes to your first part of your first question in respect of aquaculture, so it's not a policy area that's in the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. It's for the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and currently this Department, Climate, Energy and the Environment, is not a statutory consultee in respect of applications for aquaculture.
Thanks, Deputy. So just in relation to the aquaculture, so Birdwatch Ireland has submitted maybe a handful of responses in the last 10 years to aquaculture licence applications, and mainly the concern would have been relating to the supporting documentation on the wild birds, for example, we would have had questions in relation to that, and how it was done, and the conclusions drawn. So we would send in, because our mission is for the conservation of wild bird species. Some of them, 63% of wild bird species in Ireland are red or amber listed birds of conservation concern, so they're in trouble. So the process, it's again going back to process and making sure process is done properly and methodologies are done properly, and competent people are there to do the processes, especially and providing the ornithological expertise as well.
Thank you, Deputy. Yes, just to speak to aquaculture, Sustainable Water Network doesn't do site-specific responses to the applications, but we did recently publish a national level policy briefing on aquaculture, but particularly how it relates to Marine Strategy Framework Directive and Water Framework Directive objectives. So coming back to the case-by-case management, sweeping rules aren't going to work. There is an increasing overlap between marine aquaculture production areas and the Natura 2000 network sites. But there are, as Mr. Murphy said, with the mussel farming, there are forms of aquaculture which can very much contribute to the environmental objectives and provide ecosystem services. For instance, with oysters, they can filter up to 140 litres of seawater a day, so really benefiting the marine environment. Reefs acting as carbon sinks and nurseries for other fish species. So when there are forms of aquaculture which are done in a regenerative and restorative way, they can be very beneficial to the environmental objectives of the MPAs. However, there'd be other forms of aquaculture, for instance, open net salmon farming, which probably wouldn't be very conducive to the environmental goals. So it's really down to the case-by-case management.
Thank you, Deputy. Just to say on ORE and the aspect of offshore renewable energy, Fair Seas have a MPA and offshore renewable energy policy position that I can send on to the committee if that would be useful. But just to note that regarding MPA specifically, I've actually stood outside the building here at the gates with the head of policy from Wind Energy Ireland, and we have a good working relationship there. And they have been, we issued a joint statement. It was at the end of the Dáil sitting last summer recess, the beginning of the summer recess last year, where the Fair Seas and also the wind industry, represented by Justin Moore at that time, Wind Energy Ireland, calling on the government to go ahead and publish the MPA legislation as soon as possible. So in regards to ORE and the industry, they want that certainty that comes from knowing what the legislation will say and what the responsibilities will be for them when sites are designated. So we're very much, and that certainty I think is key. I think we're hearing it from the fishing industry as well, from ourselves and from the offshore renewable energy industry, that this legislation really needs to go ahead, and we need to be involved. I think we're all in the same place on those issues. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. And there was two members had indicated that they wish to come back in. So I propose to give, as we have 10 minutes left, Deputy McLaughlin 5 minutes and Deputy Whitmore 5 minutes. And just again to note that the question and responses need to be within that 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Guramagat Cahirla. What I wanted to do earlier on was just acknowledge, I thought it was very helpful to get the statements from the environmental organisations around the failure of policy and the failure to consult in terms of the existing protected areas that are there. I think it's really helpful. I think there can be often a distrust between environmental organisations and fishing organisations. A lot of it is because fishing communities are struggling, as you know, and we've had terrible news in recent times. So it's an industry and a community that are very much under tremendous pressure. So I think your statements are really helpful, acknowledging the lack of consultation, and I welcome that. Can I just ask, Ms Carr, you had talked about international best practice and models. Can I just invite you to circulate or to send to the committee examples of that? I think it would be very helpful in our deliberations as we engage with the legislation, so thank you for that. The other point I wanted to make is that it has been deeply, deeply frustrating, the delays in this legislation. And you can see today from the evidence and the witnesses and from the views of the members that we urgently need to sort this out. The difficulty is the longer that you delay the legislation, the less time you have to make sure that the practices are good in terms of co-creation, research, everything that needs to be done in order for us to meet our targets. So I'm going to ask Cahirla that the committee would write to the Minister after today's meeting, urging the drafting of that legislation. The current time frame is mid 2026, and we all know what happens. We know, Senator Noonan, you know what happened to the last piece of legislation, how it got caught up. So we should write, if you don't mind me suggesting this, Cahirla, to the Minister, urging this to be done as soon as possible, and that the types of practices we want to see can only be done when this legislation is brought through at the earliest possible opportunity this year. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
McLaughlin, and yeah, I totally agree with your proposal, and I take it that that's agreed by all members, that we do that, and not only that we would ask the Minister to do it urgently, but we'd ask for a clear timeline for that to happen. Deputy Whitmore.
Thanks, Chair. And I absolutely agree with what my colleague has said. I think today was a really useful exercise, and actually, like, what I found most interesting was actually, both the fishing industry and the environmental organisations are pretty much saying the same thing: want consultation, want proper management, and I think that's a really strong starting point for the department, and I think we need to make sure that whatever process, and it will be the DMAP process, that it is as strong as possible. But I do think it is a really welcome starting point for you, and I think the onus is now on yourselves to develop that process. I do think, Chair, that because the DMAP process was in the previous Dáil, it would have been with a different department, and indeed a different committee. And if the whole premise of the new MPAs is going to be based on the DMAP process, I think it would be really useful for us as a committee, and I know we're looking at our work programme at the moment, but to really look at that DMAP process and to see where the gaps are, such as the consultation, what happened at the start and what changed then, John, where you thought actually it got better as it went through. Well, we need to start the second round at that better place, and similarly for the environmental groups, what data has been used, how do we make these as strong as possible, can we make them dynamic, or this, what's the, and so I'm just wondering, Chair, I would think it would be really worthwhile if we had a review within this committee, perhaps bringing the department and different groups in again to look just specifically at that first DMAP process and how it was worked through, where the gaps were, because it was your first time doing it, it wasn't going to be perfect, but how we can build on that, I think that would be really, really useful. And indeed, I'm just, because I know we were very short on time, but I know Fair Seas have a list of recommendations as well, and it would be interesting to know what the department's view are on those 10 points. So if we could have that in a written form, that would be very useful. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Whitmore, and certainly as we're currently looking at our work programme, and we'll be arriving at a decision at our next private meeting. So I'd encourage you to maybe send that idea in to myself and the clerk, and we'll certainly make sure that it's included and it'll be discussed then and for decision at our next meeting. I want to thank all our members, indeed all our witnesses, for participating here today. It's not so often that we have a full house, be it members or witnesses, notwithstanding the very important items we discuss here. So we managed to get through our business fairly well. My takeaway from having sat here and listened to the questions and the answers and the responses was the amount of agreement that's here between all the various organisations that are represented here, and I think that's really welcome. Long may it continue. Long may we listen to one another, take on board each other's views, and I think the actions that have been suggested here at this meeting, that we would use this committee to light a bit of a fire under the Minister, to publish that legislation, to try and expedite this process. But also to ensure that it's done in a way where dialogue is central to it. I think if those two action points come out of this meeting, it has certainly been worthwhile. So once again, thank you very much. And as there's no further business, the meeting stands adjourned. Come on.